Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for technical sales professionals and technical sales leaders. And folks, these are live conversations. We are coming to you live at noon here in the Eastern Time, July 29th. By the way, happy summer. We're unfortunately just about to crest the midway point, or probably have already crested the midway point on the summer. I hope you all are having a good summer. My guest this week, folks, is someone whom I've gotten to know over the years. And you all know how these conversations go, but in case you're new to these conversations, these are, as I like to say, by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And I have a feeling today's conversation is going to meander in some interesting places. My guest today is a gentleman named Keith Carson. You can already tell by his pleasant laugh, he's just an all-around good guy. He is the founder of a company called Integrated Sales Solutions. He is a partner of mine in the Aslan Sales Training Network of Partners. And the conversation today is, quote, matters of the heart and how that applies to sales. And frankly, when I first heard him sharing this idea with me, it caught me a tad off guard. And I said, we need to dig into this. And the more we talked about it, the more I realized that we need to have a conversation. Keith, thank you so much for being here, sir. How are you doing today?
My pleasure. I'm doing well, Chris. Good to be with you.
So I already see that a gentleman whom I've never actually met in person, but who is on these conversations frequently, Cliff Barcliff, who's also been a guest on the show, is awesome. Saying hello. Folks, allow me to invite you to chime in and say hello. If you have any questions for Keith or myself, please feel free to share or ask. I'm guessing maybe about empathy already. Cliff is sort of anticipating where it is we may be going. Keith, I introduced you briefly. Do you mind taking just a moment and introducing yourself a little bit more broadly? What is your background in sales, and what is it that you do for organizations currently?
Yeah, I'll take you back to when I left college. So I grew up in Southern California, went to school in South Carolina, and actually got my start in college ministry. And I was doing that for about 5 years. And when I left college ministry and went into the marketplace, I got my start in medical device sales. So I was working for a medical device manufacturer, and I was calling on neurosurgeons, orthopedic spine surgeons, level 1 trauma hospitals. And over the course of my career, have held positions as a VP of sales and have carried a bag in the field. And I've primarily spent my time in healthcare. But as you mentioned, recently, it was 3-4 years ago, I started my own company, Integrated Sales Solutions. And at the very essence, what I do is provide fractional sales leadership solutions for organizations. I'm interested in developing both healthy sales professionals and high-performing sales systems. And that's where we ran into each other, is some of the work that we've been doing at Aslan. I've been drawn into the way in which they approach training sales professionals that aligned with my values and my approach. And so it's good to be in that ecosystem, but I have been in sales management and as a sales professional for over 20 years.
So there's so much to unpack there. First, how a kid growing up in San Diego ends up in university in South Carolina is a whole nother conversation.
An unknown university in a lot of ways.
A little known.
That's a good way.
A little bit of credit. A little known.
If you live in Southern California, it was unknown at the time.
Completely and totally unknown. Yes. I'll assume for a moment that maybe you were pursuing sports or something. Do you mind just talking a little bit more about this notion of the college ministry? So you said you got into college ministry. Well, was that while you were still in university? Was that after university? Do you mind unpacking that just for a moment?
Yeah, totally. So, one of the things that has been a central part of my life, even since growing up, was my faith. And in college, it was a very formative time for my faith. And so, when I thought about what I wanted to do after college, it was wanting to help other people grow in their relationship with God. So when I left Furman, I actually didn't leave because I stayed on staff with a college ministry for 5 years after I graduated from Furman. I joke with people that I spent 9 years at Furman, but it didn't take me 9 years to graduate from school. So I spent 4 years in school and 5 years on staff with a college ministry.
Well, my joke about college is I spent 5 years in university, and yes, it did take me 5 years to graduate. I just called that fifth year a victory lap. So you've been through this transformative time in your life. You found a calling, if I can use that term, after
Mhm.
graduation to get into college ministry. You did that for 5 years. How does let's just assume a 25-ish-year-old young man decide to go from college ministry into
Mm,
medical device sales? Do,
mhm.
do you mind walking us through that process?
Yeah, a few things that contributed to that decision. I think the primary one is that I did not see myself actually in what I would describe as vocational ministry for the rest of my life. There were too many other things that I wanted to explore and wanted to try. I had grown up in an environment where I was exposed to business, had worked in some businesses, even as summer jobs. And I was drawn to sales because of the relationship development aspect
Hmm.
of it. And so, in some ways, it was more, there are a few things that I want to try before I kind of put a stake in the ground and say, hey, this is the career path that I want to pursue. The second thing is that the team that I was a part of was moving to Minnesota.
And
And as a Southern California kid, I just had some slight reservations. I love people from Minnesota. I know people from Minnesota. They're absolutely salt of the earth. But it was a little bit of a non-starter for me when I was thinking about being from Southern California and ending up there for a period of time.
I can appreciate that a great deal. And by the way, Jim Shields chimed in, giving Furman a little bit of love. Jim
Yes,
Shields,
thanks, Jimmy.
nice to hear from you. Nice to see you, Jim. So, did you actively seek out medical device sales? Did it actively seek you out, or did the universe just come together
Mm.
and it just worked its way? It worked its way out.
Yeah, like many people, I found the job through a relationship. There were two gentlemen that were working for this organization at the time, and they knew that I was looking. And so they had introduced me to the idea of going into I had thought about going into sales and kind of wanted to go into sales, but they introduced me to the idea of starting with their company in medical device. And I said, "Hey, it's great. I don't have much money in my bank account. I'm working a temp job right now. Let's take it. Let's go." It was in Phoenix, Arizona, and that's how I got my start carrying a bag in the field in
Phoenix is
sales.
a little warmer than Minnesota, so
Yes, it is.
at least it had that going for you. Were there any aspects of selling early on that you had reservations about, that were
Mm.
intimidating or uncomfortable to you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and if you allow me to tell a brief story, if I may,
That's the reason
because
you're here, is to tell stories. So please do.
this I think can be a catalyst for our conversation. But here I am coming out of college ministry, and I raised my own financial support. And my days essentially consisted of me talking to young people about their future and about their faith and about their life. And it was meaningful work to
Right.
me. I enjoyed it, and it was hard to leave. But I can remember when I first got an opportunity with this company in medical device sales. We had our first sales meeting, and it was in Dana Point. It was
Know
at
it
a
well.
beautiful resort
Yep. Know it well.
overlooking the cliffs,
Yeah.
absolutely gorgeous. We were out having a happy hour, sharing some drinks, having a good time. And we started our sales meeting that evening. And before we started our sales meeting, the sales manager walked us out of the ballroom, down the hallway, through the lobby to the outside kind of portico. And he said, I want to introduce you to your sales incentive for this year. And he had lined up 5 of the most beautiful cars that I had
Mm,
ever seen: Lexus, Mercedes, BMW. The sales professionals from the dealership were there. Doors were wide open. Come in, take a look, run your hand against the leather, put your hands on the steering wheel, get a feel, get a vision for you being in this vehicle. And I remember a combination of emotions. One emotion was, wow, this is amazing. So I just need to sell some more stuff and I could potentially be sitting in one of these rides. And then I also felt like, how does this align with my approach to sales? And we
mm,
were in the medical device space. And so, these are devices, they were used externally, but these were devices that patients were going to use in
mm.
order to improve and benefit their lives. And candidly, I didn't want to be sitting down across the table with a decision maker thinking about myself in a BMW. And
Mm.
that might sound self-righteous. I preface that by saying I was stoked by the opportunity to win this car, but it came in conflict
Mm.
with some deep-seated convictions and values that I had about the way in which I wanted to approach sales. And it was that moment, Chris, that I started thinking about how my heart, the way it was formed, the way it was shaped, the deep convictions and values that I held, how it was going to shape the way in which I was going to sell.
Such a powerful story, and I have to say, Keith, for presumably a young man in his 20s to have that clarity and that perspective is rather unique, I think. So in our conversation leading up to this, you said something to me that really struck a chord, and you began to allude to it there. You said there in essence there's 3 elements. There's the hand, the head, and the heart. And you just
Mhm.
mentioned that. So what were some of the things that you specifically did, either from a mindset perspective or from an activity perspective or a behavior perspective, that helped you integrate those 3 parts of your sales practice or your
Mhm.
sales approach?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, good question. Um, One of the big questions in my career has been, how do we form sales professionals? How do we shape sales professionals? And my experience was that in the sales locker rooms that I was in the sales training rooms that I was in, we spent all of our time talking about the head and the hands, right? Sales knowledge and then sales skills. And we very rarely talked about matters of the heart. So I'll just give you one example. And I think this is something that we encounter as sales professionals every single day. What do we do with those 2 minutes before a call with a prospect? And one of the practices that I started engaging in was I typically would have a piece of paper on my desk, and I would have some of my notes as to where I wanted to take the conversation. But I would just jot down something brief. And oftentimes it was a statement like, help me love them well,
Mm.
or show up curious,
Mm.
or Aslan's terminology, show up other centered, right? And just to have that moment right before that call, and for that to be the last thing that I'm thinking about, hopefully making its way from my head to my heart, it freed me up to be able to show up and know that, I've got my discovery process, I've got my notes, I've got my agenda, and yet, maybe even most importantly, people are going to remember how they experienced me. And I want to show up and just love them well. That might ultimately lead to me closing the deal, but it also might lead to me, and we've had these conversations where all they want to talk about is some issue in their life, or something that happened to their child, or something that they're afraid about for the future, or all they want to talk about is the problems that they're having in their business, even if the service or product that you're offering doesn't necessarily connect to those problems. And so I've been really interested in some of those micro rhythms and practices that we engage in that ultimately shape the way in which we approach sales.
Yeah. I'm pausing just for a moment, Keith. Just a few comments from folks online. Cliff mentioned the need to believe in the problem that you're here to solve above else. And Brian, I hope I'm saying it right, Oling, show up other centered. Love that. Yeah, Brian, that's a term that we use a lot. So Keith, there are so many thoughts going through my mind. I'm going to repeat some of what I'm hearing. So here you are. You're still a relatively young man. You graduated from college. You found a calling to get into college ministry, and for 5 years you helped other young people sort of explore their faith and consider their relationship with God. And then you decided, amongst other reasons, but to include, you didn't want to move to Minnesota. You thought, well, maybe there's more I want to do with my job. And I'll be honest, I suspect for many people, the idea of going from a campus ministry profession or career to a sales career seems like a bit of an odd jump. And they almost seem very much in conflict with one another. And what you're saying is that at a very early stage in that part of your career, you were basically presented with a big, in fact, a parking lot full of big carrots that were big shiny cars, and said, if you do well, this is your reward. And what you discovered was that for yourself, that wasn't necessarily aligned with what you consider to be your personal values. So you set out to really balance the head and the hands, which we talked about, which is the knowledge and the skills, with really how you viewed the world, how you viewed people, and your values, and that's where you learn to strike a balance between the three. Have I said anything incorrect, or have I missed any points so far?
No, right on. Yes, right on.
So there's so many questions that come to mind. The first is, and you and I are probably roughly the same age. I'm not going to embarrass you by asking you how old you are, but I'm gonna put
Thank
you and
you.
I probably born in the 60s. I'm a 60s, I was born in the 60s. Um, and I was, in fact, I was chatting with my wife just last night, and she was asking me, how have you developed the ability to do certain things? And I said, well,
Mm.
sweetheart, it's more a factor of 50 plus years in the making than it is anything else, because I can assure you I wasn't like this. So as you reflect on some of the earlier parts of your career, is it fair to say that you didn't always get this right, and that you had to learn to sort of check yourself and
Mm.
recenter yourself at times?
Undoubtedly. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and um, I still feel like on a weekly, if not daily basis, I'm trying to bring my mind and heart back to my core values, and not even so much what matters to me, but ensuring that I'm focused in on what is important and matters to the client. And for me, as someone of faith, and I think even practices like AA or others that kind of have principles beyond this idea of, hey, we we need to acknowledge a higher power. Um, the higher power has interest in that conversation as well, and uh, I went on eventually to go study leadership, theology, and society, got a master's degree in that space. And one of the central questions I was kind of asking is, how do all these things collide in a sales call, right? Because I have my own personal motivations
Mm-hmm.
in this call. I need to take into consideration the client's motivations in this call.
Mm-hmm.
My company has some expectations for me in this call. And yet, as a person of faith, I also want to show up and know, what does my higher power desire in this call. So, yeah, I mean, it's funny you say how that decision from college ministry to sales would be quite a jump. And I think in many ways, the questions of my professional life have been trying to bridge that gap. My company's called Integrated Sales Solutions because I've been questioning and wondering, how do I integrate these things? And to your point, it has been a lifetime work and will continue to be a lifetime work, no doubt.
May I play devil's advocate just for a moment?
Please, I would love that, man. What
So
makes this fun?
I'm imagining someone who may be listening to this right now live, or maybe someone who might catch the recording, and they may be thinking to themselves, well, I mean, this is all fine and good, but I'm not a person of faith, and
Hmm.
that doesn't really relate or click or connect for me. So how is this applicable to me? Is there any benefit of having more of this other centered mindset or approach, if I'm not as sort of, the or if I don't have sort of the same sort of
Yeah.
faith-based
Hmm.
attitude that you do, Keith?
Yes, yes. I think it's an important and good question. And I'd love to dialogue around this idea that everything I learned in kindergarten. And and when I look at the modest success I've had in sales, um, I'm thankful for the sales training that I've gone through, and that has been so helpful and informative with regards to sales knowledge and sales skills. But matters of integrity,
Mm,
right? Or fulfilling your commitments. or as we talk about at Aslan, showing up other-centered, displaying courage in a sea of rejection. I think these are all things that we were most likely taught in kindergarten. I still have a 5-year-old, Chris, and so we are sending our last child to kindergarten. And these are the types of principles and ideas that are taught in that space and at that age. Be kind to others, walk in their shoes, understand their situation and circumstance. And yet, unfortunately, I think in most sales training rooms, we're not having conversations about those things. Aslan does it better than anyone. But those things oftentimes make the difference, Chris, between closing a deal and not closing a deal, right? It, if I am I showing up as a person of integrity? Am I fulfilling even my small commitments to this prospect? And if I show up in that way, I guess my experience has been that it's led to more success than less success.
Well, and
And
I
these are
think,
the types of conversations that I think we ought to be having more of, because they can be critical to us hitting our number.
well, and that's, to be fair, where I was going with this a little bit is what in beyond just feeling more at peace with yourself and your profession, the
Mhm.
way in which you're going about your business. What have the results been? And what I hear you saying is that, well, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm actually doing, or have done, quite well as a result. But I think the key point was that wasn't necessarily the goal, right? Or
Yes,
that wasn't,
correct. Yeah.
that wasn't the number one goal. The number one goal was
Mhm.
for you to fully be present, to make the other person the priority, and to really to serve to the extent that you could. And if that
Mm.
also meant doing business and caring for your family and all the other things that means, then great.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I think there's an interesting conversation too around, uh, can you train to these things?
Hmm.
I was having a conversation with a gentleman who's leading a sales innovation program at a university. And I was sharing some of these ideas with him, and he's in a research environment. And his question back to me was, I love these ideas, but can you ultimately train
Hmm.
to them? And I think that's an important question, a question that I don't necessarily have a definitive answer to. But what I do believe is that we can smuggle some of these ideas into our sales training. And I'm
Hmm.
just going to give you one example, Chris, and this is something that I do with those that I train and coach, is I typically have them write their eulogy or
Hmm.
write an epitaph for their life, because I want them to think about what they want at the end of their life and to connect the dots between that desire and the way in which they approach this conversation. And
Hmm.
what I have found when I've done this exercise is so oftentimes there's a distance between what they ultimately want at the end of their lives, which typically is relationships, it's people, it's connection, versus how they maybe approach sales in that moment in a discovery call or a meeting. And I think there's opportunities for us to make that gap a little bit more narrow in training environments and training contexts.
I have to say, Keith, I've had some reasonably deep conversations on in this venue, but this may be officially the most the deepest conversation
I
we've
hope we
had.
haven't lost anyone as a result, Chris.
But allow me to suggest one of the most critical, because here's what I hear you saying, there's just so much truth in it, is that we have to connect with our authentic selves, and we have to know our authentic selves, and if we are not, and I'm going to use the word selling, and that's just not the right word, but I don't have a better word. If we are not selling, if we are not carrying out our professional responsibilities and activities in a way that aligns with our true selves, we are not being true to ourselves, and we are not being our authentic self. We are being inauthentic, and I believe that a lot of people sense this. I believe that under the cover somewhere they feel some sort of misalignment, but they don't know why, or they don't know what to do about it. And I think
Yes.
what you're saying is so powerful. Is be honest with yourself. Consider, and I mean, look, I mean, you gave me goosebumps for a moment, right? Which is what's your eulogy, right? Like what do you want said about you? And here's the truth: none of us are getting out of here alive. I mean, right?
Death and taxes.
I mean, so this is some heavy stuff, but I think, and one of the things that we like to say at Aslan is we are most fulfilled when serving other people. So in what way can we most serve other people? Keith, I'm going to press pause just for a moment, because there've been a few comments that have been shared that I just want to double click on and recognize. Cliff says other-centered, unselfish, selflessness, ultra, 100%. That's exactly what we're talking about. Yes. And empathy. Now, this is an interesting, don't know if you can train empathy, but the importance of these ideas can be part of a sales training. And I'm going to talk about, I'm going to share a thought that I have, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. And Brian mentioned authentic curiosity, 100%. I mean, what we're really talking about is authenticity. Authentic. By the way, folks, if there's anybody else out there who cares to say hello, or you have a comment or a question for Keith or myself, please feel free to ask. I love that we're seeing some of these comments. Cliff mentioned empathy through stories, and of course, we've heard Keith share a few stories. Keith, I want to double back on this idea of training, and can this be trained? And Cliff brought this up as well. It's interesting, and I don't know if I've ever even shared this with you, Keith. In most of my training programs, I open with this idea. In fact, it's a question. I ask the group, because when we think of training, we tend to think of the word education. And I ask people, are you familiar with the root word of the word education? And most people are not, by the way. And I think the Latin word is educe or educar or something like that. But the English word, the verb is to educe. That's the educe is the root word of the word education. And what does it mean to educe? To draw out. Education is largely misunderstood. It's far more about drawing out that which exists, more than it's putting a bunch of new stuff in. So in my mind, if we can run sales training that helps draw out some of these deeper seated beliefs and perspectives, and gives them the courage, to use your word, the courage to be nice over right, the courage to be more other-centered and less pushy, I think that not only helps people sell more and hit the number, but be more satisfied in their roles. And that's some of the things that you're sharing. That's what's striking a chord for me. Does that resonate with you, sir?
It definitely resonates with me. And let me even add to that I think we need to be doing more of that for the sake of the prospect as well. We've been doing this for some time, and we've seen an evolution in the prospect. And I think what we're finding is that they are becoming even more distrusting. based off of bad experiences that they've had with previous sales professionals. And if we can do some of the small, simple things right, like showing up other-centered, like being unselfless, like or unselfish, like Cliff mentioned, to show up with empathy. Some of these human characteristics and traits that connect us all as human beings, then I think what we are finding and what we will continue to find is that it'll allow us to be able to connect better with that prospect and have a more constructive conversation to really help their business and
Yeah.
help them as individuals. So I completely agree. I love the idea of starting, the session with that. And what that also does is it causes them to really think more deeply about, okay, what's going on here, right? And what are the things that I need to explore in order to be more successful in this job? And I will just add to that, Chris, fear to me is a perfect example.
Mm.
And I still feel that in some measure on a weekly basis.
So
And
can you elaborate on that?
yeah, I mean, I think it is just the overall nervousness and anxiety associated with I'm showing up for this call with someone that I don't maybe know well, and I want to be great at what I do. I want to impress them. I want to show up in a way that helps their business. I want them to actually be interested in the conversation. So you're walking into a situation that is completely unknown
Mm.
in many ways. And so call it fear, call it anxiety, call it nervousness. I think it is the reality of what we all experience in sales. And I think it would be good and right for us to have some more conversations around that in the sales training rooms that we're in today.
It's so interesting, and particularly for me coming off the heels. So I was in Boston last week to run a training program for a team of
Mm,
sellers, technical sellers, global account managers, and sales engineers together. And then the week before in Zurich, same company, just a different group of people. And walking into these meetings, these workshops, I sensed a fair amount of skepticism and suspicion and
mm.
a strong lack of desire to be there, certainly by certain people. And by the way,
Surprise, surprise.
I understand why, right?
Yes, yes.
Particularly, these are senior sales professionals that doing it for a long time, and they're probably sitting there thinking, well, what is this guy going to tell me that I haven't heard or don't already know, right? By the way, I call attention to that. I say, you may be thinking that, and here's the truth: probably nothing. There's probably nothing that I could say that you haven't already heard. But
Yes.
here's my challenge to you: do you do everything that you know? And do you do it with the
Mhm,
consistency you should be doing it, right? Because
mhm,
rarely
mhm.
is it a problem of we don't know what to do, right? But
Yes.
I'm going to take this conversation one step further, and this is where I'm going with this. Is another thing that I say at some point during the conversation, during a workshop, I'll suggest that there's oftentimes a dichotomy between
Mm,
our self-centered objectives going into any meeting or me running a workshop like this
mm,
versus other-centered objectives. And
yes.
I even asked them, what do you suppose are my self-centered objectives walking into a room like this and running a workshop, right? They're
Mm,
well, you want to get more business and you want to do that. I'm like, yeah, I also want to be liked. I want you guys to think that, man, that guy was great, right? But what are the other centered objectives? And I think that's what you're talking about, is really
mhm.
keeping those self-centered objectives in check with the other centered objectives, right?
Exactly right. And part of what we have to do, right, is learn how to be aware of those
Mm.
and then how to demonstrate self-control to keep those at bay. Because I'll tell you, in that year when I had an opportunity to win a new BMW, it was cropping up, right? It's like
100%.
undoubtedly, understandably. And if it's not a BMW for you, it's another you got it on your vision board, this vacation that you want to take,
Yeah, it's a
or it
boat, it's a
is
vacation, it's a new
right.
house, it's a new addition to the house, a new deck. Yeah.
Totally, totally, totally. And those things in and of themselves are not bad. That's not what we're trying to communicate, not what I'm trying to communicate. It's that they can prevent you from showing up completely focused in on the other individual and their needs, and acknowledging that the road this might go down does not end up with my product or service, right? And that to me is when you start getting into conversations and situations, when you're able to say, I am not the right fit for you,
Mm.
you need to go pursue this product or this service, then I think you have arrived at a level of maturity that is ultimately going to benefit and bless you in the future,
Mm.
because people are going to appreciate that authenticity. And if they ever have any problem or any challenge associated with the problem that your product or service solves, they're going to reach back out to you,
100%.
right? Because of the trust that they have in you.
100%. And what you just suggested, it may very well be the hardest thing to do in sales,
Yes, it is. Agreed.
right?
It is so hard.
There's another wrinkle that I want to introduce to this conversation, and it's something that I hear frequently, and I'm really curious to hear how you handle this, how you talk about this. Invariably, if I'm talking to a group of sales professionals about some of these ideas that we've been talking about, right? Which is other centered, make it about them, don't be pushy, be willing to
Mhm.
walk away if it's not a good fit. Invariably, someone or many of the people in the room say, yeah, but Chris, you don't know the kind of pressure that I get from sales leadership.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
they don't care about any of this. They don't care about
Yes.
how authentic I am with my customer. They just need me to sell, sell, sell. So how do
Mm.
you ratify that? How do you make sense of
Mm.
that?
Mm. Mm. That's a great question. And I think there's some questions that you run across that you just have to sit with for a moment and appreciate the challenges associated with the pressure that so many of us feel for hitting our number.
Mhm.
And you know, I think there are a few thoughts that come to mind. And when we talk about authentic self, and when we even reframe this up in light of the end of our life, we want to lay our head down on the pillow and feel good
Mm.
about the way in which we approached our work, the effort that we put into our work, the way in which we treated others, and let the consequences fall where they may. I'm going to kind of walk out of this situation with my head held high. Not too dissimilar to if you're an athlete, if you're in theater, you leave it all out on the floor, you leave it all out on the court, you leave it all out on the stage, and you give your best because there are many things that are kind of outside of your control. um, I think the other thing that I would encourage people to do is begin to experiment with smuggling some of these ideas to their approach to sales and see what happens. Because I think what you find, or what I have found, is that oftentimes those people that are most unselfish have the best and deepest relationships with their prospects than anyone else in the room. And you have to balance that with volume, right? You can't just have 5 great relationships and say that's enough, right? You have to balance it with prospecting and knocking on doors, and in some ways, sales is a numbers game, right? It is a volume game. But gosh, the people that I found to be the ones that I probably respected the most with regards to their approach were the ones that were oftentimes in that top third, and in addition to that, had the best relationships with their prospects, lifetime relationships with
Yeah.
their prospects.
Yeah.
But man, acknowledge that that is extremely, extremely hard when you've got that downward pressure, and it competes against showing up in a, um, in an unselfish, empathetic way.
How important is it that sales leaders adopt and embrace or recognize some of these ideas that we've been talking about? Does it
Yeah,
begin there?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it starts at the top. There has to be a value of these things. And there has to be a deep-seated belief. So one of the questions that I'm oftentimes asking, and I'll talk to my prospective clients about this, is that you have deep-seated values as an organization, and most organizations do, like integrity or honesty or courage or whatever it might be. Um, these are matters of the heart, right? These are matters of someone's character. And don't you want your sales team to be reflecting those values in their conversations with prospects and with clients?
Hmm.
And if that is a yes, right? If that is important to you, if the values of your brand and how your brand is experienced with everybody outside of your organization, even within your organization. If you want to see those values get translated into the experience your prospects have, then I think you need to be having more of these conversations within the sales training rooms of your organization, because you want their approach to reflect the deep-seated values of your organization.
Love that. And you used a term earlier, not just the sales training rooms, but the sales locker rooms. And I love the visual there. And it needs to be taking place there as well.
Yeah.
So Keith, believe it or not, we've been at this for almost 50 minutes. Time flies when you're having fun.
Hard to believe.
For those of you who are still with us, we will be wrapping up soon. As I like to say, we will be landing the plane on time. The landing gear is out, the runway is in sight, so we'll be on the ground here shortly. There's one very specific question that I have left, Keith, and then we'll sort of meander our way to a close. And that is this. Let's just say, for argument's sake, I've been listening to what you have to say, and whether I'm a person of faith or not, like some of what you're saying it's just speaking truth to me. I hear some truth in what you're saying. This idea of maybe being more other centered and less pushy and less so focused on my agenda and more focused on their agenda, and this idea that maybe I should be willing to just walk away if it's not a good fit. And I'm going to try to sort of, and I love the term you used a couple of times. I'm going to try to start smuggling this into the way I operate. Is there such a thing as over rotating into some of these ideas at the expense of my success, at the expense or the risk of my fiduciary responsibility to the company, to the detriment even of the customer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, Chris, at the end of the day. I think part of the question that you're asking is, how could this impact my professional success? Right? Because I could maybe stay true to these things in my job and in my work, but if they're not leading to success, then what exactly are they doing for me? And I think that's a really, really important question. My experience has been that these principles of integrity and being kind and being authentic and fulfilling your commitments have led to my success. There has been a link. I think they're valuable in and of themselves, because at the end of the day, I want to walk away from my life and my career and have a positive wake behind me rather than a negative wake behind me. But I think you bring up a really important question that might require some more conversation. I'm curious your thoughts on that too, because I think it's important to be thinking about, how do you link these things ultimately to more success? And that is good and right and necessary in the jobs that we do and for the companies that we help and serve.
By the way, I love the image that you created, the mental image, the word picture, as we might call it, of the wake that you're leaving behind you. Because I happen to be a wake surfer, so if you're going to leave a nice smooth wake with a nice curl on it, I'm just going to jump on a board and ride that, until it goes away. So love the image there. One thought that I have, Keith, on this final topic, this idea of over. Oh, that's there. And Scott Willingham, he's the wake guy. Dialing in from KC. Scott, good to see you. Here's the truth: prospects and customers don't always know what's in their best interest.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes people hear some of what we're talking about and think to themselves, well, that means I always have to do what the customer says, or the customer's always right, or I have to, and the reality is that saying at times things that the customer doesn't maybe want to hear but needs to hear is actually being more other-centered than self-centered.
Yes.
Because it's actually uncomfortable to deliver the unpopular truth, right? What we might call the disruptive truth at times. So that, I think, when I see people embrace this and sometimes almost over rotate, that's one of the things that I see, is that they think, okay, well, I just do whatever the customer says. And I said, well, time out. That's not, I'm not saying we just avoid difficult conversations, right? We're not saying that we don't say things that are unpopular, right? It just means that there is a balance. And at the end of the day, we do have a fiduciary responsibility to our employer. Period. End of story. Right? I mean, that's what we're signing up to do. Now, I would like to believe that the things that you're talking about, finding that balance between the hand, the head, and the heart, is actually not only going to help us achieve and satisfy our commitment to the company, but far exceed it for everyone's benefit. So that's the final thought that I have. Keith, we've got about 5 minutes left, sir. Open mic night or open mic moment. Any final thoughts, comments, questions that you have just on anything that we've talked about today, or maybe anything we haven't touched on that you wanted to just sort of throw in before we close up?
Yeah, I think my final thought would be start small, think big, and go deep. And what I mean by that is, let me give you a real practical example
Please.
with some of these ideas. One of the things that I started doing some years ago is, before I have a meeting with a prospect, I send them an email and I outline my commitments to them. And I say 3 things. I'm going to seek to serve you and not to sell you. I'm going to elevate your interests above my own. And if my solution is not the right solution for you, I'm interested in helping your business. I'm going to try and point you in the right direction. Now, I think we can play devil's advocate there, and I think we could have a robust conversation around it. Here's the value of it for me, is that I'm making my commitments public. I'm telling the prospect, this is what I intend to do. I'm putting myself out on the line. And that small action, that small activity, not only establishes kind of my mindset and arguably my belief set, but it also lets the prospect know this is going to be a different experience. I hope this to be a different experience than you've had with other sales professionals. So, rhythms and practices like that, writing a note on a piece of paper before you walk into a prospect's meeting, whether you're a sales manager encouraging your team to do that, or you're an individual contributor and you're doing that while you interact with prospects. Starting small, thinking about how big of an impact these could potentially have on me if I do them over the course of a career, and then going deep with those. That would be my last word.
So love that. And I'm literally taking notes as we speak. So the 3 points that you make before the meeting: I seek to serve, not sell. That was number 1. My goal is to elevate your interest above mine. That was number 2. And what was the third one again?
The third one, that I am interested in the success of your business and you and your role, even if that doesn't mean that you utilize my product or service. And I've had many times, Chris, where it's like, I can tell in the first 20 minutes, we're not going to be a good fit, but let's talk about other problems that you're trying to solve. And let me try and connect you to people that could potentially help you.
Yeah.
So that's the third commitment that I make.
I mean, it's such a great way to close our conversation. Seek to serve, not to sell. Elevate your interest above mine. And I care about your success, whether it includes me and my solution or not.
Yep.
And start small, think about the broad potential impact, and then go deep. Fabulous. Keith, thank you so much for being here, sir. I'm going to invite you to hang around backstage just for a moment so we can part ways appropriately to Cliff and to Scott and to some of the other folks who were on.
Thanks for joining,
Jim. Thank you so much for being here. If you have not attended one of these before, I'll invite you to follow Tech Sales Advice. If you want to learn a little bit more about me, you can go to techsalesmastery.com. I'll also invite you to visit aslanSalesTraining.com. And Keith, how can people learn a little bit more about your business?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great place to do that. You get a sense of me. So check out my profile, and then you can go to SalesDifferently.com, SEE salesdifferently.com.
SalesDifferently.com. Love it. And by the way, Scott Willingham, who's on, I'm making a formal invitation for you to come join me on one of these conversations so we can talk a little bit more
great conversation
about your business. Keith, again, thank you so much for being here, sir. This was fabulous. I am rejuvenated and inspired. Hang around backstage for everybody else. Have a good day. Have a good week. And we'll see you next week on Tech Sales Advice.
Thanks,
Bye
guys.
all.